Imagine this. You're standing in Seoul in 1961. Not the Seoul you know. No neon, no K-pop, no glass towers. This is a city of rubble, tin roofs, and ration lines. The Korean War ended less than a decade ago. Half the country is ash, the other half is starving. South Korea's GDP per person is about $100 a year. That's not a typo. 100. According to World Bank reconstructions, South Korea in 1960 was poorer than Ghana, poorer than Bolivia, poorer than most of Africa. And if you're an economist back then, you write South Korea off. No oil, no minerals, no capital, a hostile neighbor to the north, an agrarian population, zero history of industrialization. A hopeless case. Fast forward 60 years. South Korea's GDP per capita is now roughly $35,000. It builds the world's smartphones, ships, cars, memory chips, and missiles. Its companies dominate global supply chains. Its culture exports faster than its steel ever did. This isn't just growth. This is one of the fastest economic transformations in human history. So here's the real question. How did one of the poorest countries on Earth pull off an economic miracle, and why does that same miracle now threaten to collapse under its own weight? Because this story isn't just about genius policy or hard work. It's about authoritarian control, forced sacrifice, economic discipline, and a bill that comes due decades later. This is the untold story of South Korea's economic miracle. And it's darker and more relevant to your country than you think. Let's start with the thesis, because this matters. South Korea did not become rich by accident. It didn't naturally develop. It didn't free market its way to prosperity. South Korea planned its way out of poverty. Under military rule, the state picked winners, crushed losers, controlled labor, rationed credit, and forced the entire population into an export machine. It worked. But it also rewired society so aggressively that today South Korea faces the lowest fertility rate on Earth, 0.72 children per woman in 2023, according to official Korean statistics. That's not a slowdown, that's demographic extinction. So in this video, we're going to dissect South Korea's miracle like a forensic economist. We'll break it into 7 decisive forces, 7 engines of growth that turned famine into factories. And then we'll confront the uncomfortable truth. The same system that made South Korea rich may be making its future impossible. Let's begin. Engine number 1, a country with nothing to lose. Here's something people forget. South Korea in the early 1960s wasn't just poor, it was desperate. The Korean War killed an estimated 2.5 million people. Infrastructure was obliterated. Literacy existed, but industry did not. According to World Bank data, over 60% of the workforce was stuck in low-productivity agriculture. This matters because desperation changes incentives. There were no powerful landowners left, no entrenched industrial elites, no aristocracy to protect. The old order was gone. Which meant one thing. The government could do whatever it wanted. And in 1961, it did. A little-known general named Park Chung-hee seized power in a military coup. No democratic mandate, no ideological purity, just a brutal clarity of purpose. Grow or die. Park openly rejected Western advice. The IMF and World Bank at the time told Korea to stick to agriculture, textiles, and light industry. Play to your comparative advantage. Park ignored them. Instead, he asked a dangerous question. What if we build industries we are bad at until we become good at them? That single act of defiance reshaped the next 60 years. Engine number 2, authoritarian planning, no veto players allowed. Let's be honest, South Korea's miracle was not democratic. Park Chung-hee ruled through emergency decrees, press censorship, labor repression, and surveillance. Strikes were illegal. Dissent was punished. Opposition politicians went to prison. But here's the uncomfortable economic reality. This gave the state total coordination power. Park's government rolled out a series of 5-year economic plans starting in 1962. These weren't vague visions, they were spreadsheets, specific export targets, specific industries, specific firms, steel, shipbuilding, automobiles, electronics, chemicals. If you were a businessman, the message was simple: follow the plan or lose access to credit. The Korean government controlled the banking system. According to IMF archival data, over 90% of industrial credit flowed through state-directed banks in the 1960s and 70s. Loans were cheap, if you obeyed. Miss export targets, credit cut. Miss production quotas, license revoked. Fail too publicly, company seized. This wasn't capitalism. It wasn't socialism either. It was authoritarian capitalism with a stopwatch. And it created monsters. Engine number 3, the rise of the chaebol, national champions on steroids. This is where names like Samsung, Hyundai, LG, and SK enter the story. The chaebol weren't born efficient. They were selected. The state hand-picked a small group of family-owned conglomerates and fed them everything they needed to grow: subsidized loans, import protection, tax breaks, guaranteed contracts. In return, the chaebol did one thing above all else: they exported. By 1970, exports had risen from less than 5% of GDP in 1960 to over 20%, according to World Bank data. By 2022, exports hit roughly 45% of GDP. South Korea didn't consume its growth, it shipped it overseas. Think of the economy like a gym. Domestic demand was weak, so the government forced its firms to lift heavy weights in global markets. Lose internationally, you die. Win, you get bigger weights. This ruthless exposure made Korean firms hyper-competitive, but it also created concentration. By the 1980s, the top 10 chaebol controlled an enormous share of industrial output. Competition inside Korea weakened, power centralized, and workers paid the price.
Here's the part that rarely makes the highlight reels. South Korea didn't just export goods. It exported human exhaustion. During the high-growth decades, Korean workers routinely logged 60 to 70-hour work weeks. Labor protections were minimal. Unions were crushed. Wages were suppressed to keep exports competitive. According to OECD historical data, Korean manufacturing wages in the 1970s were a fraction of those in Japan, despite similar hours. Families adapted. One income, long shifts, delayed marriage, children raised by grandparents. The country ran on sacrifice, and it was framed as patriotic. Park's regime explicitly told citizens that leisure was selfish and consumption was unpatriotic. Savings rates soared above 30% of GDP in some years, according to Bank of Korea data. This created capital for investment. It also rewired social norms around work, family, and identity. The system worked until it didn't. South Korea didn't have natural resources, so it built human ones. Education spending surged. By the 1980s, South Korea had one of the highest secondary school enrollment rates in the developing world. By the 1990s, tertiary enrollment exploded. But this wasn't liberal education. It was industrial education. Engineers, accountants, chemists, managers. Test scores mattered because factory output mattered. And here's the kicker. Education became a private arms race. Families poured money into tutoring, cram schools, exam prep. According to Korean government data, private education spending reached nearly 8% of GDP by the 2000s. That's massive. Children became projects. Failure became unacceptable. This produced brilliant workers. It also produced stress, anxiety, and a generation that quietly decided, maybe we don't want kids. Hold that thought. If you think the miracle was smooth, think again. In 1997, South Korea slammed into a wall. Years of debt-fueled expansion, opaque chaebol finances, and short-term foreign borrowing collided with the Asian financial crisis. Capital fled. The won collapsed. GDP contracted by 5.1% in 1998, according to IMF data. Firms went bankrupt, unemployment tripled. Middle-class families saw lifetime jobs vanish overnight. And then something extraordinary happened. South Korea accepted the pain. The IMF bailout came with brutal conditions: financial reform, corporate restructuring, labor flexibility. Millions lost jobs. Lifetime employment died. But unlike many countries, Korea didn't stall. Within 2 years, growth returned. Exports surged. Productivity rose. The economy became leaner and harsher. Work became more precarious. Inequality widened. Young workers entered a labor market with fewer guarantees and higher competition. The system survived. The social contract did not. Now we reach the bill. South Korea today faces a demographic collapse so extreme that economists struggle to model it. In 2023, South Korea's fertility rate hit 0.72, the lowest ever recorded for a large economy. To be stable, you need 2.1. At 0.72, the population halves in roughly 2 generations. Why? Because everything that powered growth made family formation unbearable. Long hours, extreme competition, high housing costs, education arms races, precarious jobs. Children became economically irrational. Women, highly educated and overworked, opted out. Men, facing unstable careers, delayed marriage. Urban housing prices soared. According to Korean government data, Seoul apartment prices more than tripled between 2000 and 2022. The system optimized for exports, not life. And now, the workforce is shrinking. Fewer workers mean lower growth, higher dependency ratios, and fiscal stress. The miracle is eating its future. So here's the uncomfortable truth. South Korea's economic miracle was not magic. It was a high-pressure system. Authoritarian coordination, export discipline, labor sacrifice, delayed consumption. It worked spectacularly once, but systems designed for catch-up growth often fail at maturity. South Korea built factories faster than families, and now it faces a choice no spreadsheet can solve. Let's tally the bill. From $100 GDP per capita to $35,000, one of history's greatest economic ascents, but also the world's lowest fertility rate, one of the most stressed youth populations in the OECD, an aging society racing a shrinking workforce. South Korea won the growth race, but it may be losing the future. And here's the warning, because this matters to you. Many countries today want a Korean model: strong state, industrial policy, export discipline. But they forget the cost. Growth systems shape societies, and societies remember long after GDP numbers fade. The miracle was real. The consequences are too. And the next chapter? That's still being written. If you want to understand how another miracle quietly broke under its own success, the next video you should watch is how Japan engineered prosperity and accidentally froze it for 30 years. Because history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme with interest. And this time, the bill is already overdue.